She walked into the ballroom on the arm of the man who had spent years trying to destroy her husband's empire, wearing a diamond ring that caught the chandelier light like a blade. Her emerald gown skimming the curve of a belly that told a story Kang Ji-hoon had not been prepared to read. He stood at the edge of the room with a glass of whiskey he had stopped tasting 20 minutes ago, and everything he thought he understood about the last 6 months collapsed in a single breath. Seo Min-jae's hand pressed flat against the small of Zuri Calloway's back. Protective. Familiar. The gesture of a man who had already won something he considered his. And Zuri, the woman Ji-hoon had signed away on a Tuesday morning without looking her in the eye, did not glance across the room once. That was the thing that cut deepest. Not the ring, not Min-jae's hand, not the pregnancy that forced Ji-hoon to do brutal arithmetic in the privacy of his own skull. It was the fact that she walked into the same room as him and did not feel it. If you've ever given up something irreplaceable and only understood what it was worth after it was already gone, stay with this story, because this is that kind of night. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Every week we bring you stories that reach inside your chest and don't let go. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, don't look away. Bosang. The charity gala occupied the top floor of a glass tower that overlooked the entire bay, the kind of venue that existed to remind everyone in the room how far they had climbed from wherever they started. San Francisco glittered below like scattered embers. The water was black beyond the lights. Ji-hoon had attended because his legitimate shipping interests required his visible presence at exactly this kind of event 3 or 4 times a year. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, shook hands with Port Authority executives and city council members, accepted a glass of scotch from a circulating tray, and spent the first 40 minutes of the evening performing the exact version of himself that these rooms demanded. He was good at that. He had been good at it for 20 years. I was standing near the eastern windows talking to a man from the Maritime Commerce Board when the elevator doors opened across the room and the composition of the entire evening shifted without anyone else noticing. Ji-hoon noticed. He registered Zuri before he fully processed who he was seeing. Something in his peripheral vision simply stopped everything else. The way a sound in a dark house stops you before your brain identifies what made it. He turned because something in him had not stopped listening for her, even after he had told himself he was finished. She was wearing green, deep emerald, floor-length, the kind of dress that required a woman who knew exactly what she was walking into. Her hair was up, her shoulders were straight. She moved through the entrance of the ballroom the way water moves, without announcing itself, without apology, finding its level naturally, and without effort. For a half second, Ji-hoon told himself he was wrong, that it was someone who resembled her. Then she turned her profile toward the room, and he saw the pregnancy, the unmistakable full curve of it, and the half second ended. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. The man from the Maritime Commerce Board waited a moment, then followed Ji-hoon's eyeline across the room, found nothing that seemed worth stopping for, and said something Ji-hoon didn't hear. "Excuse me," Ji-hoon said. He didn't move. He just stopped pretending he was present in the conversation. Zuri accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. She scanned the room with the relaxed attention of someone who had been in rooms like this before and was neither intimidated nor particularly impressed. 6 months ago, she would have stood at the edge of events like this and tried to make herself smaller. He remembered that. He remembered being impatient with it, though he had never said so directly. He had simply stopped inviting her. The woman standing 60 feet away from him now was not making herself smaller for anyone. Then Min-jae appeared. Seo Min-jae was 43 years old, Korean-American, and had run the waterfront operations on the south side of the bay for over a decade. He and Ji-hoon had spent most of that decade in a cold, careful war with each other, the kind of war conducted in boardrooms and shipping manifests, and the occasional late-night meeting that both men walked away from without shaking hands. They had never been violent with each other directly. The violence stayed several steps removed, handled by other people, deniable, professional. Min-jae was taller than most people remembered him being. He carried himself with the particular ease of a man who did not need to prove anything because the proof was already established. He wore a dark navy suit, and he crossed the room toward Zuri with the certainty of someone who already knew where he was going. He said something near her ear when he reached her. Zuri smiled. It was not the smile she had performed at Ji-hoon's events during the last 2 years of their marriage. The careful, appropriate, I am here and I am fine smile. It was something unguarded, something she couldn't have manufactured. Then Min-jae placed his hand against her back, and Ji-hoon saw the ring. Diamond. Substantial. On the correct finger. Ji-hoon's glass was in his hand, and then it wasn't. He had set it down somewhere. He didn't remember doing it. His brain was running calculations he hadn't asked it to run, because that was what his brain did. It quantified, assessed, identified risk and implication before the rest of him caught up. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago. Before that, they had been separated for nearly 3 months. 9 months total. A pregnancy that, visible, put the conception right at the edge of their separation, possibly before it. The numbers were not clean. The numbers were not clean at all. Across the room, Min-jae drew Zuri slightly closer, and the movement was so natural, so unconscious, that Ji-hoon understood it was not performed for his benefit. Min-jae hadn't even looked in his direction. That was somehow worse. Ji-hoon stood alone near the eastern windows of a room full of people and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. The specific, nauseating vertigo of a man who has just realized he made a catastrophic mistake and cannot identify where in the sequence it happened. He made himself look away. He picked up his drink from wherever he had put it, drank, and let the memory come, because it came anyway, and fighting it took more than he had left at that moment. He had been 31 years old and bleeding from a wound in his left side that he had been managing alone for 2 hours because the men he employed were good at many things and completely useless in a hospital. He had told Remy, his driver, to park 3 blocks away. He had walked into the emergency room at San Francisco General at 11:40 on a Wednesday night and sat down in a plastic chair and tried to look like a man who was merely inconvenienced. The triage nurse had seen through that in approximately 40 seconds. She was not what he expected. She was not alarmed by him, which was the first thing he noticed. She asked him in a calm, professional tone what had happened, and he gave her the version of the story designed for official consumption, and she listened to it the way someone listens to a story they are choosing not to contradict yet. When she got him into a bay and found the wound, she found the weapon in his waistband at the same time. She held it by the barrel, unloaded it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done exactly this before, locked the safety, and set it in the cabinet drawer without comment. "I'm going to need you to be very still," she said, "and very quiet." "I'm not in the habit of either," he told her. "Tonight you are," she said. He was in the habit of people accommodating him. She accommodated the wound. There was a difference, and he felt it immediately, and it fascinated him in a way he could not have articulated at the time. Her name was Zuri. He saw it on her badge. She worked the overnight shift 3 nights a week and picked up weekend hours when they were short-staffed, which, she mentioned to no one in particular while she worked, was most weekends. She had been a nurse for 8 years. She had grown up in Oakland. She had a way of being in a room that made the room feel steady. He returned 4 days later with flowers. She thanked him, told him they were lovely, and suggested he consider seeing his own physician for follow-up care. He returned a week after that with coffee. Then with an invitation to dinner that she declined with the particular politeness of someone who had no intention of reconsidering. Then with a second invitation that he framed differently because he had paid attention to what she valued during the 3 hours she spent saving his life. Not the wealth, not the fear, the conversation. She agreed to coffee. 1 cup. Public place, she specified, as if he hadn't already understood that she trusted him approximately as far as you could throw a man who'd been shot. He spent that 1 cup of coffee being more honest than he had been with anyone in 6 years. He didn't tell her everything. He told her enough. He told her about his mother, who had come to this country with $11 and a suitcase and died before she saw what Ji-hoon built with the wreckage of her sacrifice. He told her about the neighborhood where he'd grown up, the specific arithmetic of powerlessness that had shaped every decision he'd made since he was 19 years old. He told her that the empire he'd built was the only language he knew for safety, and that he was aware of what that said about him. She listened. Not the listening people performed when they were waiting for their turn to speak, actual listening, the kind that required something from the listener. "You know what's going to happen," she said at the end of the coffee, "if you keep coming back." "Tell me," he said. "You're going to eventually make me believe you're someone I can trust," she said. "And then I'm going to find out whether you actually are." It took him 4 months to make her believe it. It took him 4 more years to prove she was right to have been cautious. Their first years together were the only period of Ji-hoon's adult life during which he consistently chose something over business. Zuri made that easy without intending to. She didn't demand it, didn't weaponize her needs against him. She simply existed in their home in a way that made coming home feel like arriving somewhere instead of just not being somewhere else. She cooked Sunday dinners even when it was only the two of them. She left notes in his jacket pockets. Not romantic notes, just the kind of specific, ordinary observations that told him she was paying attention. A comment about something funny she'd seen on her walk. A reminder about a phone call he'd mentioned. Evidence of his existence in another person's daily thought. He had not understood the value of that until it stopped. The business expanded. The Pacific Coast operations merged with 3 separate distribution networks. The meetings ran longer. The phone calls began earlier in the morning. Ji-hoon told himself he would recalibrate once the expansion stabilized, which was the thing men told themselves when they were choosing not to acknowledge the choice they were actually making. He convinced Zuri to leave the hospital. He told her it wasn't appropriate for his wife to work the overnight shift at a public emergency room. He told her he would take care of everything. She was reluctant. He had understood that, or he thought he did. But she had loved him then, and she trusted him. And she stepped away from the work that had been her identity for 8 years because he asked her to. He did not take care of her. He took care of his empire and expected that to be the same thing. The house became enormous. The dinners stopped. The notes stopped showing up in his pockets because he wasn't putting on the jackets she had time to reach before he left. Anniversaries became another item on a calendar he hadn't checked. Zuri's voice in their arguments shifted over the years, from urgent to exhausted, from specific to abstract. From fighting to the low, flat register of a woman cataloging damage she no longer expected to see repaired. When she asked him about starting a family the 3rd time, he said, "We'll talk about it when things slow down." Things did not slow down. He did not make them slow down. Then Soojin arrived. Han Soojin came with impeccable credentials and a strategic intelligence that Ji-hoon recognized immediately as exceptional. She rebuilt his logistics framework in 90 days. Restructured 3 underperforming distribution contracts, and identified a vulnerability in Min Jae's waterfront operations that Ji-hoon had been trying to locate for 2 years. She was invaluable in the way certain tools are invaluable, precisely calibrated, exactly suited to the purpose. He told Zuri she was a colleague. He believed it when he said it. Soojin understood immediately that the marriage was already structurally compromised. She did not pursue Ji-hoon directly. That was not how she operated. Instead, she made herself indispensable. Meetings ran late because the work required it. She was present at dinners because the clients expected continuity. She touched Ji-hoon's arm in the casual way of someone establishing physical comfort, gradually enough that no single instance seemed significant. She made sure Zuri noticed. Not obviously, just enough. And when Zuri brought it to Ji-hoon, carefully at first, then with more desperation as he kept dismissing her, Ji-hoon did what exhausted, guilty, avoidant people do when they don't want to examine the truth. He turned it back on her. Jealous, he said. Paranoid. He said she was suffocating him, that she had no life of her own and was trying to make his the center of hers. He said things in those arguments that he had constructed to wound, because wounding ended arguments faster than truth did. And he had been very busy and very tired, and he had told himself he would apologize later when there was more time. There was never more time. There was just the night she had his favorite dinner on the table in a small box beside his plate, and he came through the door at 11:15 with Soojin beside him, and Zuri stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not hurt, not the exhausted grief he had gotten used to navigating. Something final. Something that had made a decision without consulting him. "I need to know something," she said, "and I need you to tell me the truth. Zuri, do you still want to be married to me?" The question landed in the silence of the kitchen, and Soojin, to her credit, went still. Ji-hoon had been awake for 19 hours. He had been in a bad negotiation for 6 of them. His left temple was pounding, and Soojin had made a comment in the car about how the marriage was clearly affecting his focus, and something in him had agreed with that in the shallow, exhausted way of a man who was confusing distraction with clarity. "I think," he said, "that we made a mistake." Zuri did not flinch. She was absolutely, terribly still. I think, he continued, because he had started and the alternative was to acknowledge in real time the scale of what he was doing, that we both knew, somewhere, that we wanted different things. No, she said quietly. Only one of us knew that. She left the kitchen. He heard her on the stairs. He heard the bedroom door close, not slammed, which was somehow worse than if she had slammed it. She signed the divorce papers 3 days later without a single modification. She left no note. She was gone within the week, and Ji-hoon had stood in the kitchen on the night she left and looked at the small gift box still sitting beside the cold plate on the table and opened it, finally, because no one was there to see him do it. Inside, a pair of baby shoes. White, tiny. The kind of thing you bought when you were certain about something, when you believed in the future of something. He held them in his palm for a long time. Then he put them back in the box, and put the box in a drawer, and did not open the drawer again. Now, across a ballroom in the tower above the bay, Zuri laughed at something Min-jae said, and the sound did not carry across the room, but Ji-hoon saw it, and that was enough. He had spent 6 months telling himself that the divorce was a correction, that the marriage had run its course. The two people who wanted different things had finally been honest with each other and separated with whatever dignity was available. Standing here, watching the woman he had divorced carry a child that the calendar would not let him dismiss, he understood that he had not been correcting anything. He had been burning something down and calling it renovation. The question eating through him now, the question he could not silence, the question that the rest of this evening would be organized entirely around, was the same question that any man in his position, in that room, looking at that ring, doing that arithmetic, would have found himself unable to stop asking. Whose child was it? And what had happened to the woman he had been so certain he was finished with? He set his glass down on a nearby table, straightened his jacket, and began moving across the room. He crossed the room the way he crossed most spaces, without hesitation, without announcing himself, with the particular forward momentum of a man who had spent 20 years walking toward things other people walked away from. The crowd thinned slightly as he moved through it, the unconscious social physics of proximity to someone the room recognized as dangerous, even in a charcoal suit at a charity gala. Zuri saw him coming before he reached her. He knew this because she stopped laughing, not dramatically. There was no sharp intake of breath, no visible flinch. The laughter simply ended, the way a radio signal ends when you pass out of range, and her expression reorganized itself into something careful and composed and utterly unreadable. She had learned that, or she had always known it, and he had simply never given her reason to use it on him before. Min-jae turned a half-second later, reading her, and then his eyes found Ji-hoon, and the temperature between the three of them dropped without anyone adjusting the thermostat. Ji-hoon stopped at a distance that was respectful without being submissive. He looked at Zuri first. That was deliberate. That was the only thing he owed her in this moment, and he knew it. Zuri, he said. Ji-hoon. Her voice was level, not cold, not warm, calibrated in a way that took practice. A beat. The party moved around them, indifferent. You look well, he said, and heard immediately how inadequate it was, how the words did not come close to containing what he was actually looking at, which was a woman who had rebuilt herself so completely in 6 months that he was not sure he had ever known the original version as well as he believed. I am well, she said. Min-jae said nothing. He stood beside her with the patient stillness of a man who did not feel threatened, which was somehow more aggressive than if he had been visibly territorial. Territorial men were managing their fear. Min-jae was not managing anything. He was simply present, and he had decided that Ji-hoon could open whatever door he planned to open, and they would see together what was behind it. Ji-hoon looked at him. Min-jae. Ji-hoon. Same inflection back. Flat. Precise. The 2 syllables landed like a door being closed quietly but firmly. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, and contained a decade of conducted warfare between 2 organizations that had spent years costing each other money and sleep and men. Congratulations seem to be in order, Ji-hoon said. He did not specify what he was congratulating them on. He let the words sit there and cover everything, the ring, the pregnancy, the fact of the 2 of them standing together in his city at his kind of event as if they had always belonged there. Zuri tilted her head slightly. Thank you. When is the wedding? He asked it like a man asking about the weather. I was very good at asking things like that. Soon, Min-jae said, before Zuri could answer. The word was not aggressive, it was simply a closed gate. Ji-hoon held Min-jae's gaze for a moment, and something passed between them. Not quite acknowledgement, not quite warning, the particular frequency two men who have long respected each other's danger transmit without translation. Then Ji-hoon looked back at Zuri, and the composure he had been performing cracked along a hairline fracture he hoped was not visible. "Can I have a few minutes?" he said. "Just—" He stopped. He did not say alone. He knew better than to say that. "I just want to talk." Zuri looked at Min-jae. Not for permission. Ji-hoon registered that carefully, but in the way of someone who had built a partnership based on transparency and was honoring it even here. Min-jae said quietly, "I'll be at the bar." He held Zuri's gaze one moment longer than necessary. Not possessive, just present. And then he walked away without looking at Ji-hoon again, which was its own kind of statement. Zuri turned back to Ji-hoon. The ballroom noise was sufficient cover. They were effectively alone in the middle of 200 people. "Say what you came to say," she said. "How are you?" he said. "You already asked me that." "I asked if you were well. I'm asking how you are." She studied him for a moment with the expression of a woman deciding how much honesty was appropriate and how much was unnecessary exposure. "I'm good, Ji-hoon. I'm genuinely good. Which I know isn't the answer you're looking for, but it's the true one." "I'm not looking for a specific answer." "You're looking for something," she said. "You don't cross rooms without a reason." He was quiet a moment. Around them a string quartet had begun something low and European. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. "How far along?" he asked. The question arrived without warning, or rather with the warning that had been embedded in the entire preceding conversation and was now finally here, and Zuri absorbed it without expression for 2 full seconds before she answered. 7 months, she said. 7 months. Ji-hoon did the arithmetic one more time with the precision of a man who dealt in contracts and timelines and the exact legal meaning of dates. The divorce finalized 6 months ago, separated for 3 months before that. 7 months pregnant meant the conception happened approximately 1 month before the separation. The numbers were still not clean. They were, in fact, worse than he had calculated from across the room. "I see," he said. His voice came out even. He was proud of that, in a distant way. "Do you?" Zuri said. "I'm looking at the math, Zuri." "I know what you're doing." Something in her voice shifted, still controlled, but with an edge now, the edge of a woman who is prepared for this conversation and was not going to let it be ambushed into emotional territory she hadn't chosen. "And I'm going to tell you right now that I won't be having that particular discussion with you tonight, in this room, or possibly ever." I'm not finished." She took one breath, deliberate and visible. "You made a decision 6 months ago, a very clear decision, and I respected it. I signed every paper. I took nothing from you that I wasn't entitled to, which was very little, and I left. That is what you asked for, and that is what you received. Zuri, the conversation about what was or wasn't happening in the last weeks of our marriage is not one I owe you," she said. "Not here, not dressed like this, not while you're doing arithmetic in your head and trying to decide whether you have any claim to make." The word claim hit something in Ji-hoon's chest. "I'm not making a claim," he said. "I'm trying to understand what I'm looking at." "You're looking at my life," she said. "The one I built after you finished with ours." She did not say it with anger. She said it the way you state a fact about geography. This is where the river is. This is where the land begins. These are the boundaries that exist whether you acknowledge them or not. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "You're marrying Min-jae." "Yes. He is my—" "I know who he is," she said. "I knew who he was when I met him. I knew exactly who both of you are, Ji-hoon. I'm not naive. I never was. You just preferred to believe otherwise because it made the narrative simpler." That landed. He felt it land. "When did you meet him?" he asked. "After the divorce." "How long after?" She gave him a look that told him the precision of that question had not gone unnoticed and was not going to be rewarded. "Long enough that it's none of your business." Across the room, Ji-hoon could see Min-jae at the bar, holding a glass of water, not watching them. That was a particular skill, the ability to not watch something you were absolutely tracking. "Are you happy?" Ji-hoon asked. Zuri blinked. It was the first time all evening she'd been surprised by him, and it was brief, but he caught it. "Yes," she said. "He treats you well." "He treats me like a person," she said, which sounds like a low bar. But you and I both know it isn't. That one he absorbed without visible reaction, which was the hardest thing he had done since walking across the room. I made mistakes, he said. Ji-hoon. Her voice went quieter. Not softer, quieter. There was a difference. Don't do this tonight. Not here. If you need to say whatever it is you need to say, call my mother. She'll tell you whether I'm willing to have that conversation, but not tonight. He looked at her for a long moment, at the emerald dress and the diamond ring and the fullness of her that the dress could not disguise, at the woman he had sent away from his house on a Tuesday morning and told himself was the right decision. Okay, he said. She gave him one small nod. Not dismissal, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that the conversation had ended cleanly enough and that she was choosing to accept that. And then she turned and moved back toward the bar where Min-jae was waiting. Ji-hoon watched her go. Min-jae saw her coming and put his hand on her back again, the same gesture as before, and she leaned into it slightly, almost imperceptibly, the physical shorthand of two people who had built something real. Ji-hoon turned back to the windows and the bay and the black water below and stood there for a long time, doing nothing at all. He left the gala at 10:40, which was 40 minutes earlier than his presence required. He told Dae-hyun, his lieutenant, that he was done, and Dae-hyun, who had been with Ji-hoon for 11 years and had developed an acute sensitivity to the specific register of his employer's silences, said nothing and walked with him to the elevator. In the car, Ji-hoon sat in the back seat and looked at his own hands. Outside the windows, San Francisco moved past in its nighttime version, neon and fog, and the particular loneliness of a city that contains millions of people and no shortage of empty space inside all that density. Dae-hyun drove. He knew better than to ask. They were 12 minutes from the estate when Ji-hoon spoke. What do you know about Zuri and Min-jae? Dae-hyun's hands were steady on the wheel, too steady, the kind of steady that meant he had been waiting for the question. Some, Dae-hyun said. Ji-hoon looked up at the rearview mirror. How much is some? The pause was short but present. I wasn't sure you wanted to know. When has that ever been how we operate? This felt different. Tell me. Dae-hyun exhaled slowly. They met in Carmel, about 4 months after the divorce was final. She was working at a clinic down there. She went back to nursing. Min-jae was down the coast for a meeting and someone introduced them. A beat. He started making trips down that way, several a month. Ji-hoon said nothing. By February, he was making the drive twice a week, Dae-hyun continued. She didn't come back to the city until recently. They kept it quiet. How long have you known? 6 weeks. The number sat in the car. 6 weeks, Ji-hoon repeated. I was trying to find the right moment. There is no right moment for that kind of news, Dae-hyun. There's just the moment. Dae-hyun accepted that without argument. Ji-hoon turned back to the window. The fog was thickening over the bay. The bridge was a suggestion of light through the white. The pregnancy, Ji-hoon said. Do you know anything about the timeline? Another pause, longer this time. I know some things, Dae-hyun said carefully. But there's more I've been trying to verify before I brought it to you. Bring it to me unverified, Ji-hoon said. I'll decide what it's worth. Dae-hyun chose his words with the precision of a man who understood that certain sentences, once spoken, permanently altered the landscape of a relationship. There's a possibility, he said, that the pregnancy timeline is more complicated than what she told you tonight. The car turned through the gates of the estate. Ji-hoon said, Find out. The house was too large for one person. This was not a new observation. Ji-hoon had been the only permanent occupant since the week after the divorce, Soo-jin having understood, with the strategic intelligence that defined her, that moving into the house before the ink was dry on the papers would have been a visible overclaim. She was there often. She stayed sometimes. But the house still felt like a place built for an occupancy it no longer had. Soo-jin was waiting in the study. She was wearing a silk shirt and reading something on her phone, and she looked up when he entered with the comfortable ease of someone who had made themselves at home in a space that technically belonged to someone else, and had simply decided that discomfort about that was not productive. You're early, she said. Yes. She set the phone down. Read his face the way she read everything, quickly, thoroughly, with the detached analysis of a woman who had learned that other people's emotions were primarily data. You saw her. It wasn't a question. She was there with Min-jae, Ji-hoon said. I know, Soo-jin said. He stopped. He had his hand on the back of a chair, and he let go of it and turned to face her fully. You knew she would be there. I knew Min-jae was attending. I assumed she would be with him. You didn't think it was worth telling me that my ex-wife would be at the same event. I thought it would be fine. Her voice stayed even. I thought you were over it. Over it, he repeated. You said, I know what I said. He sat down heavily in the chair, which was the first imprecise physical movement he had made in hours, and pressed one hand flat on his knee and looked at the middle distance. She's pregnant. Soo-jin's expression didn't change. I know. He looked at her. You know. It's not my information to deliver, Ji-hoon. You have known that Zuri Calloway is pregnant, and you have been sitting in my house and not mentioned it. It's not... How long? Soo-jin set her phone down more deliberately now, a small recalibration. A few months. I heard from someone in Min-jae's orbit. A few months, Ji-hoon said. His voice had gone very quiet, very flat. The register that people who worked for him understood immediately was more dangerous than volume. Soo-jin. You made it clear you were finished with that chapter, she said. I was protecting your focus. You have 3 contracts in negotiation, and the Busan connection still needs. Look at me, he said. She did. Did it occur to you that there might be a reason I would need that information regardless of whether I wanted it? Something moved behind her eyes. Something careful. What do you mean? I mean the timeline, he said. I mean that she was 7 months pregnant tonight, which puts the conception inside the window of our marriage. Soo-jin was still. Which means, Ji-hoon continued, that there is a question that needs answering that I cannot answer from inside this house talking to someone who decided my focus was more important than my right to know. Soo-jin stood up. She moved to the window. This was something she did when processing. She liked to have her back to the room, liked the brief privacy of looking at something else while organizing her thoughts. Ji-hoon had found it charming once. Right now it made something in his chest go cold. The math doesn't mean what you think it means, she said, to the window. Then tell me what it means. She turned around. Her face was arranged in the expression he recognized as her negotiating face. Not deceptive, not exactly, but strategic, revealing only what served a purpose. Zuri and Min-jae have been together for months. The child is his. You don't know that. I know enough. How, Ji-hoon said, do you know enough? The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. It was the 3 seconds that changed everything, because Soo-jin was among the most controlled people Ji-hoon had ever met, and she did not fumble silences. She filled them precisely, or she let them sit with intention. A 3-second fumble from Han Soo-jin meant that she had reached for a response, found it inadequate, reached for another, and arrived at none. Soo-jin, he said. Ji-hoon, you're tired. Tonight was difficult. How do you know enough about the timeline of Zuri's pregnancy to be certain it's Min-jae's child? She moved away from the window. I think you should sleep before we continue this. I think, he said, that you should answer the question. You're upset. I'm not upset. He stood. I was taller than her, and he rarely used that fact as a tool in conversations with people who worked for him. But he was standing and she was across the room, and the geometry of the moment was doing something to the air between them that he didn't engineer and didn't stop. I'm asking you a specific question, and I'm watching you not answer it, and I'm going to need you to understand that the number of times I allow that in this house is exactly once. Soo-jin met his eyes, and what he saw in them was not guilt. He had expected guilt, but something more complicated. Calculation. She was calculating, even now, which version of whatever she was holding would do the least damage. That was when Ji-hoon understood that there was something to hold. That was when his empire began its second collapse. Not the external one, not the one Dae-hyun had been tracking in shipping manifests and leaked intelligence, but the interior one, the structural failure of a man who had trusted the wrong architect. Sit down, he said. She sat. He remained standing. Start from the beginning, he said. Not tonight, before tonight. Tell me what you know about Zuri that you haven't told me, and tell me why you haven't told me, and I want you to think very carefully before you begin, because the version that protects you and the version that is true need to be the same version. Soo-jin folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the floor for a moment, And when she looked back up, the calculation was still there, but it had shifted. She was no longer figuring out how to manage him. She was figuring out what she could withhold and still survive the conversation. Which told Ji-hoon she could not tell him everything, which told him everything. I knew about Zuri's pregnancy earlier than I said, she began. How much earlier? Before the divorce was final. The room was absolutely silent. I found out through a contact, she continued. A nurse at General who still knew Zuri. It wasn't... She paused, and Ji-hoon watched her edit herself in real time. It wasn't something I sought out. The information came to me. And you sat on it. I made a judgment. You made a decision, he said. There's a difference. A judgment is what you make when you don't have a stake in the outcome. What did you decide and why? Soojin was quiet for 3 seconds, 4 or 5. I decided, she said finally, that it complicated things. Whose things? She did not answer. Ji-hoon stood in the middle of his study, in the house he had built to contain an empire, and then lost the one person who made that empire feel like it was for something, and he looked at the woman who had redesigned his entire inner circle in 18 months and asked her the question he already knew the answer to. Did Zuri tell you she was pregnant before the divorce? He said. Did she try to reach me through you? Soojin's hands moved in her lap. One small adjustment, a tell she hadn't eliminated. She sent a message, Soojin said, to my work line. She asked me to let you know she needed to speak with you before the papers were signed. The room tilted. Not physically. Nothing moved. But something in the way Ji-hoon experienced the dimensions of the space around him reorganized itself. The way a room reorganizes when someone turns a light on that you didn't know was missing. She sent a message, he said. Yes. To you. She didn't have your direct line anymore. You changed it after the separation. I know I changed it. His voice was very quiet now, the quietest it had been all evening. What did you do with the message? Soojin looked at him for a long moment, not calculating now, not managing, just looking at him the way someone looks at a thing they have already broken and are holding the pieces of and have not yet decided whether to show. I deleted it, she said. The words entered the room and stayed there, present and permanent, the way certain sentences are permanent, not because they are the worst things that have ever been said, but because they are the ones that cannot be unsaid, cannot be recontextualized, cannot be absorbed and filed away and revisited later with a more generous interpretation. Ji-hoon crossed the room in 4 steps and opened the study door. Get out of my house, he said. Ji-hoon. Now, he said, collect what is yours. Leave everything that belongs to this organization. You have 20 minutes. Soojin stood. She looked at him with an expression that held, underneath the surface, the faint structure of something he might have once identified as regret, if he had been in any condition to extend that kind of reading to her. He was not. She gathered her coat from the arm of the chair, her phone, her bag from beside the desk. She moved toward the door with the controlled efficiency of a woman who had planned for a number of outcomes and was now executing the one she'd hoped to avoid. At the doorway, she stopped. There's more, she said, about what happened after, about why Zuri left the city. Get out, he said. Ji-hoon, you'll want to know before you... If you say one more word in this house tonight, he said, every professional connection you have on this coast will know what you did, and the ones on the other coast. Get out. She left. He stood in the doorway of his own study and listened to her footsteps on the marble in the front door, and then the silence that followed, the enormous, absolute silence of a house built for more than one person that had been, in ways he was only beginning to understand, empty for much longer than 6 months. He did not move for a long time. Then he went to his desk, sat down, and called Dae-hyun. Find out everything, he said, when Dae-hyun answered. Everything that happened to Zuri between the day she signed the papers and the day she left the city. Medical records, hospital visits, anything. I don't care how you find it. Ji-hoon, Dae-hyun said carefully. Are you sure? She sent a message, Ji-hoon said, before the divorce was final. She tried to reach me and Soojin intercepted it. The silence on the other end of the line was the silence of a man who had been sitting on information and was now recalibrating how much of it had just become urgently relevant. Dae-hyun, Ji-hoon said. I'll call you in an hour, Dae-hyun said. The call ended. Ji-hoon sat in the chair where Soojin had been sitting 20 minutes ago and put his face in his hands and stayed there in the dark study of his enormous house, The bay invisible beyond the fogged windows, the city indifferent outside, and the slow, grinding machinery of consequence finally, irrevocably, catching up to him. Dae-hyun called back in 53 minutes. Ji-hoon was still at his desk. He had not moved to pour a drink, had not turned on additional lights, had not done any of the things a man does when he is trying to make himself comfortable inside an uncomfortable hour. He sat in the partial dark with his phone face up on the desk and waited, which was something he was not accustomed to doing, and the waiting had a physical quality to it, a low-grade pressure behind the sternum that he recognized distantly as dread. He picked up before the second ring. "Talk," he said. Dae-hyun's voice came through measured and careful, the voice of a man who had spent the last hour organizing difficult information into the most survivable sequence. "I'm going to tell you what I found. I need you to listen to all of it before you respond." "I'm listening." 3 days after Zuri signed the divorce papers, she was admitted to San Francisco General. The ER, not a scheduled admission. Dae-hyun paused, and the pause had weight. She was there for 2 days. Jae-hoon's hand on the phone did not move. "The admission records are protected, obviously, but I have a contact who worked the floor that week. She was admitted for pregnancy complications, severe stress-induced. She was..." Another pause, shorter, but harder. "She lost the baby, Ji-hoon." The study was very quiet. Outside, somewhere beyond the fogged windows, a car passed on the road below the estate, its headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling, and then it was gone. "Whose baby?" Ji-hoon said. His voice came out flat. Not because he was controlled, because the part of him that controlled his voice had gone somewhere else temporarily. "Yours," Dae-hyun said. The timing is unambiguous. She was approximately 9 weeks along when she lost it. That puts the conception inside the marriage. Well, inside. Ji-hoon set the phone down on the desk without ending the call. He could hear Dae-hyun's breathing, patient, not filling the silence, just present on the other end of the line. 9 weeks. Which meant that when Zuri stood in the kitchen doorway and asked him if he still wanted to be married to her, she had already known. She had been carrying his child when he told her their marriage was a mistake. She had been 9 weeks pregnant when she signed the divorce papers 3 days later, and she had lost it alone. In a hospital, without telling him. He picked the phone back up. She was alone. "Yes," Dae-hyun said. Her mother came down from Oakland on the second day, but the first night she was alone. Ji-hoon stood up from the desk. He didn't have anywhere to go. He just needed to not be sitting. He moved to the window and pressed one hand flat against the glass and looked at the fog and the black nothing beyond it. "The message Soo-jin deleted," he said. "I think she was trying to tell you," Dae-hyun said. "Before the papers were final. I think that's what the message was." "You think?" "I can't know for certain without asking Zuri directly, but the timing lines up. She sent the message 3 days before she signed. She was admitted to the hospital the day after she signed." A beat. "If you had known..." "I know," Ji-hoon said. He did not need the sentence completed. He stayed at the window for a long time. "There's more," Dae-hyun said. Ji-hoon closed his eyes briefly. "Of course there is. The organization," Dae-hyun said. "The leaks. The intercepted shipments. I've been running a parallel investigation for the last 2 months, separate from what I was looking into about Zuri. I didn't connect them until tonight." He exhaled. "They're connected." Ji-hoon turned from the window. "Say that again." "The intelligence leaks that have been bleeding the Busan contracts, the compromised route information, the Port Authority surveillance that seemed to know our movements before we made them. I traced the source tonight, or I got close enough to the source to understand the architecture of it." Dae-hyun's voice shifted, taking on the clipped efficiency it carried when he was delivering operational intelligence. It wasn't an outside penetration. It was inside, and it goes back further than the leaks started. Whoever built it had access at the structural level, not the operational level. "Soo-jin," Ji-hoon said. "The pattern matches her access period. She restructured the logistics framework 18 months ago. The leaks began 16 months ago. She would have had the exact information that's been surfacing in the wrong places." Ji-hoon's hand tightened on the phone. "She didn't just take your wife," Dae-hyun said. "She's been selling your organization at the same time." The specific geometry of it settled over Ji-hoon like something physical. The architecture of what Han Soo-jin had built inside his life. The patience of it. The simultaneous tracks of it. The way she had dismantled his marriage and his empire in parallel while standing inside his house and calling herself indispensable. He had made her indispensable. He had handed her everything she needed to destroy him and called it trust. "Where is she?" Ji-hoon said. "I don't know yet. She's not at her apartment. I had someone check 20 minutes ago." "Find her." "Yes." "Don't touch her," Ji-hoon said. "Don't approach her. Find her and call me." He ended the call. He stood in the middle of the study for a moment, and then he did something he almost never did. He sat down on the floor. Not in a chair. On the floor with his back against the front of his desk, knees up, hands loose between them. The house was silent in every direction. He sat there for perhaps 5 minutes, maybe 10. He was not thinking in sentences. He was processing the way the body processes a physical blow, in waves, the initial shock, and then the slower understanding of the damage, the inventory of what still worked and what didn't. His wife had been pregnant with his child when he ended their marriage. She had tried to tell him. Someone he brought into his house had prevented her from reaching him. She had lost the baby alone. She had then rebuilt her life, found someone who treated her like a person, and was now 7 months pregnant with that person's child and getting married in what sounded like a matter of weeks. And his empire, the thing he had sacrificed his marriage to protect, was currently hemorrhaging from an interior wound that the same woman had opened 18 months ago. He got up off the floor. Not because he felt ready, because staying on the floor was not useful. At 7 the next morning, he called his lawyer. At 8, he was sitting across from Ryu Jae-won, his lead attorney, in a downtown office that looked out over the financial district. Ryu was 61, had represented Ji-hoon's organization for 14 years, and had the permanently tired eyes of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by anything but maintained professional composure regardless. Ji-hoon told him what he knew. Not everything, not the personal elements, not Zuri, not the lost child. The operational elements, the leaked intelligence, the compromised framework, the timeline connecting Sujin's restructuring work to the subsequent hemorrhage. Ryu listened with a yellow legal pad in front of him and a pen in his hand. He made notes. He did not interrupt. When Ji-hoon finished, Ryu set the pen down. The legal exposure from the leaks is significant if they've been feeding to law enforcement. They have. How do you know? Because the Port Authority knew about the Incheon routing before my own dock supervisors did, Ji-hoon said. That's not private sector intelligence gathering. That's law enforcement coordination. Ryu absorbed this. Then we need to move before whoever is receiving that information decides to move first. He picked the pen back up. The Sujin question, how do you want to handle it? Quietly, Ji-hoon said. Whatever she signed when she joined the organization, whatever provisions existed for this kind of breach, execute them, cleanly, no noise. There will be some noise, Ryu said carefully. Minimize it. And personally, the relationship between you and... There is no relationship, Ji-hoon said. There wasn't one after last night. Ryu looked at him for a moment over his reading glasses, the look of a man who had heard many people say many things about relationships in this office, and had learned to locate the true statement inside the legal one. He wrote something on his pad. All right. Ji-hoon left the office at 9:15 and stood on the sidewalk in the morning fog with his phone in his hand and the city moving around him, and then he did the thing he had been not doing since the previous night. He tried to reconstruct the geography of his marriage. Not the romantic history of it, the actual geography, the sequence of events. When Sujin had arrived and what had changed after she arrived, and whether the changes had felt organic in the moment, or whether he had simply not been paying sufficient attention to notice they were engineered. He had not been paying sufficient attention. He had been paying attention to expansion, to the Busan connection and the Incheon routing and the 3 West Coast port contracts and the logistics framework that Sujin was redesigning. He had been paying attention to the machine. Zuri had told him something was wrong. He had called her jealous. He walked back to his car with the full weight of that sitting directly on his chest, not metaphorically, as an actual physical pressure, the specific physiological signature of a man confronting a category of guilt that cannot be managed because it cannot be assigned elsewhere. Sujin had manipulated circumstances, but every time Zuri brought her concerns to him, Ji-hoon had made a choice. He had chosen dismissal. He had chosen to make his wife smaller because making her smaller ended the argument faster, and the argument was interrupting his work. Sujin had not forced him to do that. Those had been his own hands. Dae-hyun found Soo-jin at 11 that morning. She was at a hotel in the Embarcadero, not a place she kept a room, not somewhere she had ever mentioned, a place she had prepared for exactly this possibility, which told Ji-hoon that she had always understood this was a possibility, which told him that she had never believed she was entirely safe inside the position she had built, which told him that whatever she had constructed knowing it had an end date. He went alone. He told Dae-hyun to wait in the lobby. He knocked on the door of the room on the 14th floor and waited, and after a moment the peephole darkened and then the door opened and Soo-jin stood in the doorway in the hotel bathrobe with her hair down, and she looked at him without surprise, which confirmed that she had also been expecting this. "You found me fast," she said. "I have good people," he said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. The room was a standard business suite. Desk, chair, the generic artwork of somewhere that wasn't anywhere. Her laptop was open on the desk. Her phone was beside it. She had been working, which struck him as simultaneously impressive and revealing. She sat in the desk chair. He remained standing. "You said last night there was more," he said. "You told me to get out. I'm asking now." She studied him. Then, "You found out about the baby?" "Yes." "Dae-hyun?" "Yes." She nodded, not surprised, just confirming the sequence. "And the organization?" He said nothing. She took that as confirmation. "How much do you know?" "Enough to end your career on this coast permanently," he said. "Possibly more than that, depending on what the next 72 hours produce. I'm asking you what else I need to know, and I'm asking once, and what happens after that depends on which version of this conversation you choose." As Soo-jin looked at the laptop screen for a moment, then back at him. She had the particular composure of someone who had long ago made peace with the possibility of this moment and was now simply inside it. "Zuri didn't just try to reach you before the divorce," she said. "She tried 3 times. The first message went to your office line, which I managed. The second went to my direct line, which I told you about. The third time—" She stopped, just briefly, the only visible hesitation. "She came to the office." The room seemed to contract slightly. "She came to the office," Ji-hoon said. "Yes. About a week before she signed. She asked to see you. I told her you were in a meeting and couldn't be interrupted." Soo-jin's voice was level, factual, the voice of a woman delivering a deposition. "I told her you'd call her back. You were actually in the building, in your office, 30 feet away." Ji-hoon sat down. He hadn't intended to. His legs simply made the decision, and he was in the chair by the window, and Soo-jin was across the room, and the 14 floors of air between them and the pavement were suddenly very present in his awareness. "She came to the office," he said again. Not asking, processing. "She was very calm," Soo-jin said. "That was the thing that surprised me. I expected her to be, I don't know, visibly upset. She wasn't. She was calm and she was specific. She said she needed 10 minutes with you, and that it was important, and that it was about something that would affect both of you permanently." She said that. Those words. Both of you permanently. Ji-hoon put one hand over his face. He held it there for a moment, pressing his palm against the bridge of his nose, the heel of his hand against his forehead, and he breathed. "You sent her away," he said, into his hand. "I told her you'd call her." He took his hand away. "And I didn't call her because you didn't tell me she had been there." "No," Soo-jin said. "I didn't tell you." "Why?" The word came out rough, finally rough, the flatness giving way for just that syllable. "Give me the actual reason, not the version that makes you the most defensible. The actual reason." Soo-jin looked at him for a long moment. "Because if you had known she was pregnant," she said, "you would not have let the divorce proceed." The sentence sat in the room between them. "You know that," she continued. "You know it about yourself. Whatever you felt about the marriage, whatever you told yourself about needing to be finished with it, you would not have signed if you knew there was a child, and I needed you to sign." "You needed me to sign," he repeated. "I needed the marriage to be over," she said. "Because as long as she was your wife, she had access to you that I couldn't manage. She knew you before any of this, before I was here. She could reach you in ways that didn't go through any of the systems I controlled." She stopped. Then with something that almost sounded like honesty beneath the strategy. "She saw you clearly, Ji-hoon. That made her dangerous to everything I was building." "Building," he said, "inside my organization." She didn't answer. "How much?" he said. "What did you sell, and to whom, and for how long?" That is not a conversation I'm having without legal representation. No, he agreed. It's not. He stood. He picked up his phone from the windowsill where he'd set it. But you'll have it soon. That conversation is coming regardless of what you prepare. Ji-hoon. He stopped at the door. She left the city because of the miscarriage, Soo-jin said. Not because of you, or not only because of you. She was in the hospital for 2 days, and when she came out, she had nothing left here. The nursing license transfer to Monterey County took 3 weeks. She had it submitted before she was discharged. He kept his hand on the door. She planned it from the hospital bed, Soo-jin said. That's the kind of woman she was, is. A pause. She never stopped moving forward. Ji-hoon opened the door. That baby you lost, Soo-jin said, and there was something different in her voice now, not calculated, not strategic, the sound of a statement being made because it needed to be made rather than because it served a purpose. That was on me too. I know that. He left without answering. He sat in his car in the hotel parking structure for 22 minutes. Dae-hyun was in the passenger's seat. He had come up from the lobby without being asked, read the situation correctly, and sat down beside Ji-hoon without speaking. This was why Ji-hoon had kept him for 11 years. She sold us, Ji-hoon said, after a while. Systematically. The framework she built was designed to create access points. She sold the routing information to at least one competing organization, probably more. She may have had a law enforcement contact as well. Dae-hyun took this in without visible reaction. Timeline? Starting about 16 months ago, maybe earlier. She's not going to tell me specifics without her lawyer present. Do you want to handle this before or after the legal process? Ji-hoon understood what Dae-hyun was asking. He had asked the same type of question before, in other contexts, about other people, and Ji-hoon had sometimes answered one way and sometimes another. After, he said. Whatever happens to her happens through legitimate channels first. I want her to face what she built. Dae-hyun nodded. The organization, Ji-hoon said. What's the actual damage? Significant but survivable, Dae-hyun said. The Busan contract is gone. Whoever she fed that to has already moved into the position. The Incheon routing needs a complete rebuild. 3 of the dock supervisors are compromised, I believe, not by choice. They were fed information that made them appear involved, which is useful leverage for whoever is pressing them. Free them. It'll cost. Free them. Make it clear it came from this office and that it's unconditional. I need people who owe me something honest right now. Dae-hyun made a note on his phone. The law enforcement exposure is the most urgent issue. If she had a direct contact feeding intelligence to... I know, Ji-hoon said. Ryu is working on containment, but we need to know exactly what was passed and when. He looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure in front of him. The organization survives this. It'll cost, and it'll hurt, and it'll take months to rebuild what she damaged, but it survives. Dae-hyun said nothing, which meant he agreed. Zuri, Ji-hoon said. Dae-hyun waited. I'm going to see her, Ji-hoon said. I know that's... He stopped. He picked the right word. I know it's complicated. I know she's engaged to Min-jae, and I know what I walked away from, and I know all of it. I'm not going to her to make a claim or issue a demand. I'm going to her because she sat alone in a hospital room after losing our child, and I was 30 feet away from her and didn't know she had come to find me, and I cannot carry that indefinitely without at least... He stopped again. She deserves to know that I know, he said finally, and she deserves to hear me say what I should have said before any of this happened. Dae-hyun was quiet for a moment. She's in Carmel, but she's been coming back to the city more frequently since she and Min-jae went public. Her mother still lives in Oakland. I know, Ji-hoon said. Loretta. You're going to call ahead? I'm going to go through her mother, Ji-hoon said. I'm not going to show up unannounced. She gets to choose whether she sees me. Dae-hyun gave a small nod that contained within it a decade of loyalty and the particular respect of a man who recognized that the person he worked for was trying, for perhaps the first time in several years, to do the right thing. There's one more thing, Dae-hyun said. Ji-hoon looked at him. The pregnancy, Dae-hyun said carefully. The current one, Zuri's. I told you last night what I knew, but there's something I held back because I wasn't sure of it yet. The air in the car changed. I'm sure now, Dae-hyun said. Ji-hoon waited. My contact at General, Dae-hyun said. The one who told me about the miscarriage. She heard something else, something she wasn't supposed to hear, from a colleague who was treating Zuri at a different clinic after she moved to Carmel. He turned to look at Ji-hoon directly, which he did rarely, and the directness of it was a signal in itself. The current pregnancy, Ji-hoon. The one that's 7 months along. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. The conception date, Dae-hyun said. Based on what my contact understands from the clinic records she was able to access, and I want you to understand this is second-hand and I cannot guarantee the accuracy. The conception date for this pregnancy doesn't line up with when Zuri and Min-jae first met. The parking structure was entirely silent. It predates their relationship, Dae-hyun said, by approximately a month. Ji-hoon stared at the concrete wall. Which would put it, Dae-hyun said, and his voice had dropped, measured, giving Ji-hoon every syllable separately, as if each one needed room to land, inside the final weeks of your marriage, the final weeks of the marriage, the window of time before the separation. The last night Ji-hoon could remember, that had felt like anything other than the slow institutional management of two people who had stopped finding their way back to each other, one specific night that had arrived unexpectedly, and that both of them had let happen without discussing what it meant, because discussing it would have required honesty that neither of them had managed to locate by then. He knew the night Dae-hyun was describing. He had known it the moment he started doing the math in the ballroom. He just hadn't let himself follow the implication all the way to its end. "She's carrying your child," Dae-hyun said. Outside the parking structure, San Francisco went about its morning. Traffic and fog, and the ordinary noise of a city that did not pause for the private collapses of the men who believed they ran it. Ji-hoon sat perfectly still for a very long time. Then he said, "Does Min-jae know?" "I don't know," Dae-hyun said. "Does Zuri know that I might know?" "No," Dae-hyun said. Ji-hoon looked at his hands in his lap. The same hands he had used to sign the papers. The same hands that had been 30 feet from her when she came to his office to tell him something that would have changed everything. And those hands had been busy with something else. Something that now felt so remote in importance that he could not reconstruct why it had seemed to matter. He had an empire in ruins. He had a woman carrying what was almost certainly his child, who was engaged to his greatest rival. He had spent 7 years with a person who loved him at his worst, and he had taken that love apart piece by piece with both hands and called the demolition liberation. And now he was sitting in a parking structure in the cold morning light of a city that had never asked him to be anything other than powerful, and power was the only thing he had left, and it felt, at this particular moment, like the most useless currency in existence. "I need to see Loretta Calloway," he said. "I'll find her address," Dae-hyun said. "I know her address," Ji-hoon said. "I just need you to drive." Loretta Calloway lived in a duplex in Oakland's Temescal neighborhood, a narrow 2-story house with a front porch that held 2 rocking chairs and a clay pot of struggling marigolds that someone had been trying to keep alive through the Bay Area's indifferent winter. The street was residential and quiet at 11 in the morning, the kind of quiet that belonged to a neighborhood where people left for work early and came home late and didn't ask their neighbors too many questions. Dae-hyun parked half a block down and stayed in the car without being told. Ji-hoon walked to the front door and knocked. He waited. He could hear movement inside, the specific rhythm of someone who had heard the knock, assessed it, and was deciding before committing to the door. Then footsteps. Then the door opened, and Loretta Calloway stood in the frame in a housecoat and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at Kang Ji-hoon with the expression of a woman who had prepared for this visit and was not pleased that the preparation had proved necessary. She was 63 years old, and she was not small in any sense of the word. She had raised Zuri alone after Zuri's father left when Zuri was 9, had worked 30 years as a school administrator in the Oakland public system, and had, Ji-hoon knew from the years of the marriage, a particular gift for looking at a man and seeing exactly the specific variety of damage he was capable of. She looked at him now. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "Tonight, you can stand on the porch," she said. "I haven't decided past that." He stood on the porch. She remained in the doorway. The marigolds were between them, orange and slightly wilted, doing their best. "She told you I was at the gala," he said. "She tells me most things," Loretta said, which is something she learned to do after she stopped being able to tell you things, because you stopped being a person she could tell things to. Ji-hoon accepted that without deflection. "I know about the baby," he said, "the one she lost." Something moved across Loretta's face. Not surprise, something older and heavier than surprise. The specific expression of a woman who has held a grief alongside her child for months and is now watching the person responsible for that grief arrive on her doorstep because the consequences have finally caught up to him. "You know," she said. "Yes." 3 days after she signed your papers, Loretta said. "I got a call at 2 in the morning from a nurse who found my number in Zuri's phone. She was alone, Jihoon. My daughter was alone in that hospital for 6 hours before I could get there, and she had lost your baby. And she didn't call you because she had just finished deciding that you were done with her and she was not going to call you from a hospital bed and beg." Her voice was level. It was the levelness of extreme control, the kind that had been practiced over months of conversations with a grieving daughter, and had calcified into something nearly architectural. "She came to your office," Loretta said. "I know. She put on real clothes and she drove across the city and she went to your office and asked to see you. She was going to tell you. She had decided that you had a right to know, and she was going to tell you in person like the woman she is. And she came home and told me that she'd been sent away and that you'd call." Loretta's jaw tightened. "You never called." "I didn't know she'd been there," Jihoon said. "Soo-jin." "I know about Soo-jin," Loretta said. "Zuri has known about Soo-jin for longer than you have. What Soo-jin did was criminal, and I hope she suffers every legal consequence available. But Soo-jin didn't make you ignore your wife for 2 years. Soo-jin didn't make you tell my daughter that your marriage was a mistake. You did that, with your own mouth." Jihoon said nothing, because there was nothing to say that constituted a defense. "What do you want?" Loretta said. "From coming here? What is it you're after?" "I want to see Zuri," he said. "Once. I'm not asking for anything beyond that. I'm not going to try to disrupt what she has with Min Jae. I'm not going to make claims. I'm not going to ask her to reconsider anything. I want to tell her that I know what happened and that I'm sorry, and that she deserved better than every choice I made in the last 3 years of our marriage." Loretta studied him. "That's all," he said. "And if she says no?" "Then I don't see her," he said. "I mean that. This goes through you, or it doesn't go." Loretta looked at him for a long, silent moment, the way she had looked at him across Sunday dinners when they were married, assessing, never fully satisfied but honest about what she found. She had never disliked him, he knew. She had liked him, actually, in the complicated way of a woman who understood what her daughter loved about a man while simultaneously maintaining a clear view of everything that man was capable of destroying. "I'll call her," Loretta said. "I'm not promising anything. I'll tell her you came and that you know, and I'll tell her what you said, and she'll make her own decision. You understand that?" "Yes," he said. "And you'll wait." "However long she needs." Loretta looked at the marigolds for a moment, then back at him. "You look terrible," she said. "When did you last sleep?" "A while ago." She opened the door wider. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee. You can sit in the kitchen and look bad in private instead of on my porch where the neighbors can see you." He went inside. She called from the back hallway while Ji-hoon sat at Loretta's kitchen table with a mug of coffee that was stronger than anything he'd had in recent memory. The kitchen was the kind that had accumulated its decoration over decades, rather than designed it. Photographs pinned to a corkboard, a ceramic rooster on the windowsill, a calendar from a local hardware store with half the days crossed off in red marker. Ordinary, lived in. The opposite of his kitchen on the hill, which had been designed by someone who had charged an extraordinary amount of money to make it look like no one cooked in it. He couldn't hear Loretta's side of the conversation clearly. He heard the register of it, low, steady, and then a pause that was long enough to mean something, and then steady again. She came back to the kitchen after 10 minutes. She sat across from him and wrapped both hands around her own mug and looked at him. "She'll see you," Loretta said. "Not today. She needs a day. She says Friday morning, here at 10. "Okay," he said. "She'll have questions," Loretta said, "and I know you think you're prepared for them, but you're not. My daughter is a great deal more composed than you remember, and a great deal less forgiving than she's going to appear." "I'm not looking for forgiveness," he said. "She doesn't owe me that." Loretta tilted her head. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but it carried the weight of a reassessment. "You might be further along than I thought," she said. He drank the coffee. He did not feel further along than anything. He spent the 3 days between that conversation and Friday restructuring what remained of his empire with the methodical intensity of a man who needed to not think about the meeting. Ryu's legal team identified the extent of the law enforcement contact Sujin had cultivated, a mid-level federal investigator who had been receiving intelligence on Ji-hoon's Pacific operations in exchange for protection that had not yet been formally extended but had been implied and leveraged. The investigator was quietly managing his own exposure now, which made him temporarily less dangerous and ultimately more so. Ji-hoon authorized a controlled disclosure through Ryu. Selected information, released in a manner that demonstrated cooperation without exposure, the complex legal mathematics of preemptive transparency. The three dock supervisors Dai-hyun had identified were individually cleared of the intelligence sharing they'd been framed for. Jae-hoon delivered this personally, which was not something he typically did. He delegated. He went to each of them. He told them what had happened to their reputations inside the organization and that it was being corrected and that they had his personal acknowledgement of what had been done to them. None of them had expected that. He hadn't expected to do it. The Sujin matter was processed through Ryu with the speed and thoroughness that characterized all things Ji-hoon considered non-negotiable. She retained counsel within 24 hours of his visit to the hotel. Expensive counsel, which confirmed that she had anticipated this and prepared for it, which in turn confirmed that she had never been improvising. She had been executing a plan with contingencies built into every layer. The scope of her betrayal, as it emerged through the legal process, was larger than Ji-hoon had estimated from Dae-hyun's initial report. It was not 2 organizations she had been feeding, it was 4. She had constructed a brokered intelligence network that sat inside Ji-hoon's operations like a parasite, invisible, feeding continuously, designed to be discovered only after it had consumed enough to be irreplaceable to its recipients. The financial damage was substantial. The operational damage was repairable, but would take the better part of a year. The reputational damage within the specific world in which Ji-hoon operated was the most complex, because it required demonstrating that the breach had come from inside without acknowledging the full extent of what inside had produced. He worked 18-hour days. He did not sleep well. He thought about a hospital room in the middle of the night more than he intended to. Friday arrived the way important days arrive when you have been dreading them. Suddenly, without the preparation feeling sufficient, the morning ordinary and indifferent to the weight it was carrying. He was at Loretta's door at 5 minutes before 10. Loretta let him in without commentary. She pointed at the living room and said, "She's coming down in a minute," and went back to the kitchen and left him there. The living room held a couch and 2 armchairs and a coffee table with a stack of books on it, and the general atmosphere of a room that was used for actual living rather than aesthetics. Ji-hoon sat in one of the armchairs because the couch felt presumptuous. He heard her on the stairs. She came into the living room in a loose gray sweater and dark pants, her hair down, no jewelry except Minjae's ring, which she was not hiding and had not removed, which he noted and accepted. She was 7 months and 4 days pregnant by his calculation, and the sweater accommodated that fact without apology. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at the gala, composed, careful, giving him nothing free. She sat on the couch. They were 8 feet apart. "My mother said you wanted to talk," she said. "Yes." "So talk," she said. "I have things after this." He had rehearsed versions of this conversation for 3 days. Every version sounded wrong in his head, too formal, too emotional, too managed. He abandoned all of them. "I know you lost our baby," he said. Zuri's hands, which had been folded in her lap, were still. Her expression didn't crack. But something in her breathing changed, barely, imperceptibly, just a fraction of a second in the rhythm of it. 3 days after you signed the papers," he continued, "I know you were admitted to San Francisco General. I know you were alone the first night. I know you'd been trying to reach me before you signed." "How much do you know?" she asked. "You came to my office." Something in her face shifted then. Not grief, not anger. Something older than both of those. The expression of a woman who has carried a knowledge alone for a long time and is experiencing the particular complicated relief of no longer carrying it alone, mixed with the complicated pain of why it took this long. Yes, she said. "She sent you away," he said. "Sujin. You were there, and she sent you away and didn't tell me." "I figured that out eventually," Zuri said. "After I left the city, I had a lot of time to think about the sequence of things, and eventually the only explanation that fit was that the message didn't reach you." "Not just the message," he said. You came in person." "I did. I was 30 feet away. She looked at the coffee table, one breath, then back at him. I know. Zuri, don't, she said, quiet, not harsh, just closed. Don't do the thing where you explain what would have been different. I know what would have been different. I thought about that for a very long time in a very small hospital room, and I made peace with it. Don't make me undo that peace for your benefit. He stopped. He had been about to do exactly that. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. She looked at him. I'm not apologizing for what Sujin did, he said. I'm apologizing for the conditions I created that made what she did possible. For ignoring you, for calling you jealous when you were trying to tell me something was wrong. For making you feel like your concerns were a problem with your perception rather than a problem with the reality we were both living in. He stopped, started again. For the night I walked in with her and told you the marriage was a mistake. For the way I said it. For not knowing, not letting myself know, that you were sitting with something you were trying to tell me, and I was so far inside my own priorities that I didn't even ask. Zuri was quiet for a long time. The house was still. From the kitchen, faintly, the sound of Loretta moving around, giving them the privacy of her presence. She was actively working against us, Zuri said finally. Not a question. Yes. Against the marriage and against the organization simultaneously. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know the scope of it. You were right about everything you brought to me, Ji-hoon said. Every concern, every specific thing you pointed to. You were right about all of it, and I told you that you were imagining it. Zuri looked at him for a long moment with an expression that contained, he thought, a very specific kind of pain. Not the fresh pain of something just discovered, but the older pain of a truth that has been known for a while finally being confirmed by the person whose confirmation always mattered most. I forgave you, she said. I want you to know that. Not for your benefit. I forgave you because I couldn't leave the city and start over while I was still angry. I couldn't build something new while I was using all my energy to stay furious at the old thing. She paused. But forgiving someone and wanting them back are two different things. And reconciliation is not something I'm offering. I know, he said. Minjae. I know, he said again. I'm not here to ask for that. I just needed to say what I said, and to ask. He stopped, and then made himself continue. To ask if you're all right. Not as a question with a subtext, just that. Zuri looked at him. I'm all right, she said. I am genuinely, actually all right. I know that's not... She caught herself, and something that was almost a small, rueful thing moved across her mouth. I know it's not what part of you hoped I'd say, but I am. Good, he said. And he meant it, even though it cost him something to mean it. He had intended to end the conversation there. He had told himself he would say what he came to say and leave. And he had said it, and the leaving was the right thing. And he was preparing to stand when something in him, the part that had been doing arithmetic since the gala, the part that had been sitting with Dae-hyun's words in that parking structure for 3 days, stopped him. He looked at her. She was looking back at him with the composed patience of a woman waiting for a man to find the door. And he looked at her and he looked at the fact of her and he said the thing he had told himself he was not going to say because he had no right to say it, and no right to the answer. And the asking was a transgression. He had not earned the right to commit. Is the baby mine? The living room went absolutely silent. Zuri's face did not move. Not a flicker. Not a fraction. She had, he realized, also been waiting for this question. She had known it was coming from the moment she agreed to see him. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. She drew one breath. No, she said. The baby is Min-jae's. Ji-hoon looked at her. He looked at her with the full attention of a man who had spent 20 years reading people in high-stakes rooms, reading the specific language of bodies and breath, and the micro-hesitations that accompanied statements people were choosing rather than statements that were simply true. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked away. Okay, he said. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He looked toward the hallway that led to the front door. Take care of yourself, he said. I mean that in the simplest possible way. Take care of yourself. Zuri stood too. Ji-hoon. He looked back. For what it's worth, she said. The man I married, the one before all of it, he was someone worth loving. He was. I want you to know that I know the difference between who you were and the choices you made. A pause. The choices were yours, but so was the man underneath them. He held that for a moment. "Thank you," he said. He went to the door. Loretta was in the hallway. She looked at him with the same measuring expression she'd had on the porch 2 days ago. And then she opened the front door, and he walked through it, and it closed behind him with the soft, certain sound of a life that was no longer his. He got in the car. Dae-hyun said nothing. They drove. 4 minutes from Loretta's house, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was Ryu. Talk, Ji-hoon said. "We have a problem." Ryu's voice had the specific pitch of a man delivering information that could not be softened by preamble. "The federal contact, the investigator Soo-jin was working with. He's not managing his exposure quietly anymore." Ji-hoon straightened. "What happened?" "He preempted us. He went to his supervisors this morning and filed a voluntary disclosure. He characterized his contact with Soo-jin as an active investigation rather than a personal arrangement." Ryu paused. "Which means his exposure is now framed as law enforcement activity. Which means the intelligence he received from Soo-jin is now potentially admissible as evidence gathered in an ongoing inquiry rather than obtained through an unauthorized personal arrangement." "He's reframing the whole thing," Ji-hoon said. "He's turning his crime into a career move," Ryu said. "Yes. How much time do we have?" "Hours, potentially. Certainly not days. If they've already begun building a federal case from the intelligence Soo-jin provided, they may have enough to move on several of the Busan-related operations." Ji-hoon looked at the city passing outside the window. The Incheon routing. Completely exposed, based on what Soo-jin had access to. The dock contracts. Compromised. The 3 supervisors I cleared. Potentially re-implicated, Ryu said. "I'm sorry, Ji-hoon. The voluntary disclosure changes the legal architecture of everything." Ji-hoon thought for 10 seconds. Which was the amount of time he gave himself for thinking when action was required, a discipline he had developed at 19 and had not abandoned. "Call the supervisors," he said. "All 3. Tell them to go dark. No phones, no office, nothing that can be intercepted. Tell them I will handle this, and they will not be left exposed." "And the federal exposure for the organization itself?" "I need 1 hour," Ji-hoon said. "Delay everything you can delay by 1 hour. I need to make a call before we respond to anything federally." 1 hour is very tight. "It's what I have," Ji-hoon said. "Make it work." He ended the call. Dae-hyun looked at him in the rear-view mirror. "Where are we going?" "Back toward the bay," Ji-hoon said. "I need to make a call, and then we're going to the office." He looked down at his phone. There was exactly 1 call that could change the federal calculus in the next hour, and making it required him to use every relationship he had built over 2 decades that existed outside the organization's structure. Not criminal relationships, not the leverage that came from knowing where bodies were buried, but the quieter, more durable leverage of legitimate business connections, the long-cultivated relationships with Port Authority. Board members and city commissioners and maritime attorneys who operated in the gray space between criminal enterprise and legitimate commerce, and understood that the gray space was where most real business in this city happened. He dialed. The phone rang 3 times. Commissioner Aldridge Park answered on the 4th ring with the cautious hello of a man who had seen Ji-hoon's name on his screen and spent 3 rings deciding whether to answer. "Commissioner," Ji-hoon said, "I need 20 minutes, not on the phone, in person." "Ji-hoon, this is not a great... I know the federal investigation that's being assembled from a voluntary disclosure filed this morning," Ji-hoon said. "I know who filed it, and I know what the underlying arrangement was, and I know that the intelligence they're working from was obtained through a criminal information brokering scheme. I have documentation." He paused. "I need 20 minutes, and what I give you will be worth the 20 minutes to every legitimate interest you represent." Silence on the line. 45 minutes, Commissioner Park said. "My office." "Thank you," Ji-hoon said. He ended the call. Dae-hyun was already adjusting the route. The meeting with Commissioner Park lasted 38 minutes. Ji-hoon laid out the architecture of Soo-jin's brokerage network in precise, documented terms. Not the criminal elements, those were managed separately, but the mechanism by which the federal investigator had turned a personal corruption arrangement into a career-saving voluntary disclosure, and the specific contamination problem this created for any legal case built on that intelligence. The commissioner was not naive. "I was 67 years old and had navigated the politics of this city's port infrastructure for 15 years. and he understood the distinction between legitimate enforcement and opportunistic institutional protection. He made 2 calls from his office while Ji-hoon waited outside. When Ji-hoon was invited back in, the commissioner's expression had the flat, resolved quality of a man who has made a decision he's not entirely comfortable with and is proceeding anyway because the alternative is worse. The voluntary disclosure is being reviewed for procedural compliance, Park said. That review will take a minimum of several days, during which time no case built from that intelligence can move forward. I appreciate that, Ji-hoon said. Don't, Park said, because what I need from you in exchange is something I've needed for 3 years and have not been able to extract through any other mechanism. Ji-hoon waited. The South Waterfront, Park said. The CO organization's grip on the southern container operations has been creating regulatory problems I cannot address through normal channels because the political protection around it is too embedded. I need it loosened. I need to be able to audit those operations without the process becoming a negotiation. Ji-hoon was still. Park was asking him to create operational problems for Min-jae's organization, not to destroy it, not to expose it criminally, just to loosen its grip on a specific regulatory relationship, the kind of interference that was more bureaucratic than violent, more procedural than direct. But it was Min-jae's organization. It was Min-jae's. The man who was marrying Zuri. The man who knew, possibly, that the child she was carrying belonged to Ji-hoon and had chosen to marry her and raise that child as his own. Ji-hoon sat with this for 4 seconds. He thought about Min-jae's hand on Zuri's back in the ballroom. He thought about the answers Zuri had given him in Loretta's living room, the 5 seconds of silence before it, the stillness of her face. He thought about the man he was and the man he had been, and whether there was any meaningful distance between them. The South Waterfront audit, Ji-hoon said. I can give you documentation that supports your right to conduct it without interference. That's all. I'm not going to compromise the SEO organization directly. Park considered this. That's a narrower version of what I asked for. It's the version I can offer, Ji-hoon said. Park held his gaze for a moment, then gave a short nod. That works. Ji-hoon left the commissioner's office at 1:47 in the afternoon. He stood on the steps of the building in the January cold and called Ryu. The federal timeline is paused, he said. Minimum several days. Get our documentation package in order. I want a preemptive disclosure of our own ready to file by Monday that frames the Sujin operation as an infiltration of legitimate business activities. Ryu paused. That's actually a viable strategy. I know it's viable, Ji-hoon said. Do it. He ended the call. Dae-hyun was at the bottom of the steps. The organization? Dae-hyun asked. Survives, Ji-hoon said. Dae-hyun let out a breath that contained several days of held tension. But there's something else, Ji-hoon said. Dae-hyun looked at him. Min-jae, Ji-hoon said. The South Waterfront audit documentation I gave the commissioner. It was narrow. It won't damage his operations. But he'll know something was used. He'll find out eventually that it came from me. Will that matter? Dae-hyun said. Ji-hoon thought about it. He's marrying Zuri in a matter of weeks, he said. He's choosing to raise... He stopped. He did not complete the sentence out loud. He made a choice that cost him something to make. Using him to protect my organization, even in a limited way, even when the alternative was federal exposure, it matters. Dae-hyun said, What do you want to do about it? Ji-hoon looked at the street, at the ordinary afternoon traffic of a city that had been his primary battleground for 20 years. Nothing, he said. There's nothing to do. The decision is made. I just need to know what it cost. He looked at Dae-hyun. I need to keep a running account of what things cost now. I haven't been doing that, and it's how I got here. They got into the car. The city moved around them, dense and indifferent and ongoing, the bay glinting gray through the buildings as they headed east. Ji-hoon's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was Carmel, and it was 2 words only. No punctuation, no name attached to the message. The 2 words were, she knows. Ji-hoon stared at the text. He read it a second time. His thumb hovered over the screen. He looked up at the bay through the windshield, the gray water flat and cold, and holding its own secrets in every direction. And the car continued moving through the city that had made him and the city he had failed and the city that was still, regardless of all of it, continuing, because cities do not stop for the private catastrophes of the men who believe they run them. She knows what she knew and who had told her and what she intended to do with the knowing. Those were the questions that now stood between him and whatever came next, and they were questions he could not answer from the back seat of a car moving through January traffic. They were questions that were going to require him to be, for the first time in a very long time, something other than the man who controlled the room. They were going to require him to simply wait and see what she chose. He stared at the text for the rest of the drive. 2 words. No name. Carmel area code. The message had the specific economy of someone who had chosen their words with great care and chosen only the ones that were necessary, which meant whoever sent it understood that more words would have been worse, would have been explanation, justification, context, and that what Ji-hoon needed was only the fact. She knows. He did not text back. He did not call the number. He sat with the 2 words the way you sit with a diagnosis, not trying to argue with it, not yet, just trying to understand the full dimension of what it meant before deciding what to do with it. By the time Dae-hyun pulled up to the office building downtown, Ji-hoon had made one decision. He would not go to Zuri. He had already gone to Zuri. He had asked his question and received his answer and accepted it, and walked out of Loretta's house, and that had been the correct sequence, and he was not going to violate it because an anonymous text from a Carmel number had complicated the picture. What Zuri knew, and what she chose to do with it, was hers. He went upstairs and worked. The text came from Min Jae. Ji-hoon did not know this for certain until the following morning, when a second message arrived from the same number. This is Min Jae. I think we should talk, not about business. Ji-hoon held the phone and read the message twice. Not about business. Min Jae had been running a competing waterfront organization for over a decade, and in all that time the 2 of them had communicated through intermediaries, through attorneys, through the careful choreography of men who understood that direct contact between them was a form of escalation. They had spoken face-to-face perhaps 6 times in 10 years, and each of those conversations had been conducted in the presence of other people and had concerned very specific operational matters. Not about business was the most significant thing Seo Min Jae had ever said to him. Ji-hoon typed back, when? The response came in under a minute. Today. Somewhere neutral. You pick. He thought about it. Then he typed an address. A coffee place in the Richmond district, the kind of neighborhood where neither of them had particular professional presence. A restaurant with tables far enough apart that a conversation could be private. Min Jae replied, 2 hours. I was already seated when Min Jae arrived. Min Jae was punctual, which Ji-hoon had always known about him. He came in without visible tension, ordered a black coffee from the server without looking at the menu, and sat across from Ji-hoon with the contained composure of a man who had decided before walking through the door exactly how much of himself he was willing to show. They looked at each other for a moment. This close, across a small table, without the intermediating distance of a charity gala or a decade of territorial warfare, Min Jae looked like what he was. A man in his early 40s who had built something real with his own hands and understood the cost of it, who had the particular quality of weariness that came not from exhaustion, but from sustained effort over a long time. You sent the text, Ji-hoon said. Yes. She knows what specifically? Everything, Min Jae said. Or enough of everything that the distinction doesn't matter. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup the server had just set down. She knows the baby might be yours. She's known for about 2 weeks. One of her former colleagues from General, a nurse she trusted, figured out the conception timeline and came to her because she felt Zuri deserved to know what she was looking at. Ji-hoon was still. Zuri didn't tell me immediately, Min Jae continued. She sat with it alone for a week and a half. Then she told me. He paused. I'm going to be honest with you about the 48 hours after she told me, because I think you're owed that. I was not reasonable. I was not calm. I walked out of the house, and I drove to the coast, and I sat in a parking lot for 3 hours, and I tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with information like that. He looked at Ji-hoon steadily. And then I came home. Ji-hoon said nothing. I came home because the question of what I was going to do with that information had only one answer that I could actually live with, Min Jae said, which was the same answer I gave when Zuri first told me everything about your marriage and the miscarriage and why she left the city. I chose her then. I'm choosing her now. The child, Ji-hoon said. Is going to be mine, Min-jae said. That's not negotiation. That's what Zuri and I decided together. After the 2 days she spent crying, and the 3 hours I spent in a parking lot, and the conversation we had when I came home, that was the hardest conversation I have ever had with another person. He held Ji-hoon's gaze. The child will know Min-jae as its father. That's what we're building. I'm not telling you this to wound you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what the landscape actually is before you decide anything. Ji-hoon looked at the table, then back up. Why are you here? You could have let the silence stand. Because, Min-jae said, I needed to look at you in person and tell you that I know who the child might belong to biologically, and I am choosing to raise it anyway, and I needed you to understand that this is not a decision I made because it was easy, or because I'm naive, or because I'm trying to win something. I made it because Zuri is the most clear-eyed person I have ever met, and she has chosen to spend her life with me, and whatever came before that, including you, I am not in competition with. You're not the man she's walking toward. You're the one she walked away from, and there's a difference that I needed you to hear directly. The coffee shop was quiet around them. Someone at another table was reading a newspaper. The machine behind the counter steamed something with a low industrial hiss. And the other reason, Ji-hoon said. There's another reason you're here. Min-jae looked at him, a slight shift in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but the recognition of a man being accurately read. Zuri wants to see you, Min-jae said. One more time. She didn't ask me to arrange it. She asked her mother to contact you, but I wanted to speak with you first. He paused. Because what I needed to know, before she sits across from you again, is whether you're going to be honest with her. I've been honest with her. You let her tell you the baby wasn't yours, Min-jae said, and you accepted that answer. I know you didn't believe it. Zuri knows you didn't believe it. But you let her keep it because you were trying to do the right thing. He looked at Ji-hoon directly. That's not dishonesty. But it's also not finished. Ji-hoon said nothing. She needs to say it to you herself, Min-jae said. That's what she needs. Not for your sake. She's clear about what her life looks like. But she's been carrying this for 2 weeks, and it has weight, and she needs to put it down in the right place. And the right place is a conversation with you where nobody is pretending. Ji-hoon looked at Min-jae for a long moment. There was something strange about sitting across from this man in a quiet coffee shop in the Richmond district and feeling, for the first time in the long history of their opposition, something that was not hostility and not competition and not the careful mutual management of two powerful men protecting their territory. What he felt was closer to respect, the specific, uncomfortable, involuntary respect you felt for someone who had done something you were not certain you could have done yourself. You're a better man than I gave you credit for, Ji-hoon said. You didn't give me much credit, Min-jae said, without rancor. Just fact. No, Ji-hoon agreed. I didn't. Min-jae finished his coffee. He set the cup down and straightened slightly. Loretta will call you. Zuri will see you tomorrow morning if you're willing. I'm willing, Ji-hoon said. Min-jae stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Ji-hoon one more time with the expression of a man who has said everything he came to say and has no interest in adding to it unnecessarily. For whatever it's worth, Min-jae said, I think she loved you completely. The version of you that was capable of being loved like that. I think you should know that someone did that for you, whatever happened after. He left. Ji-hoon sat alone at the table with his untouched coffee and the newspaper rustling at the next table and the machine steaming its low industrial hiss. And he sat there for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go fully cold. And he did not move and did not think in sentences and did not perform composure for anyone because there was no one left to perform it for. Loretta called at 4 that afternoon. Zuri would see him at 10 the next morning. Same house, same terms. She's going to say some things you're not going to enjoy hearing, Loretta said. I want you to be ready for that. I'm ready, he said. You said that last time, Loretta said. He didn't have an answer for that, because she was right. He arrived at 9:58. The marigolds on the porch had been watered since his last visit. They looked marginally better, the orange brighter, the stems less compromised by their own weight. He stood on the porch and noticed this and did not know why he noticed it, except that his attention had become, over the past week, less selective. He was noticing smaller things. He was not certain this was an improvement. It was simply what was happening. Loretta opened the door before he knocked. She looked at him. She's in the living room, she said. I'm going next door. I'll be back in an hour. She was giving them the house. He understood what that meant. He went in. Zuri was standing this time, not seated. She was near the window on the far side of the living room, the winter light coming in flat and pale behind her. She was wearing the same loose gray sweater from his last visit, or one identical to it, and her hands were at her sides, and she looked like a woman who had made a decision and was standing inside it. He closed the front door behind him. They were alone in the house. "Sit down," she said. Not unkindly, just clear. He sat in the same chair as before. She remained standing for a moment longer, and then she moved to the couch and sat, and they were again 8 feet apart in the quiet living room with the pale light coming through the window. She looked at him. "I'm going to say some things," she said, "and I need you to just listen, not respond, not explain, not apologize. Just listen until I'm done." "Okay," he said. "The baby is yours," she said. The words entered the room without drama, without the weight of revelation, because they both already knew this. They had both known it and had been sitting separately inside that knowledge, and now it was simply present between them in language, which was different. "I knew when I told you otherwise that you didn't believe me," she continued. "I knew you were letting me keep the answer because you were trying to not force anything, and I appreciated that. But I can't go forward with Min-jae and with this child without having said it to you clearly, in a room where neither of us is pretending." Ji-hoon said nothing. He was listening. He had told her he would listen, and this was the hardest version of listening he had ever done. Not the listening that was waiting for an opening, but the listening that required him to simply receive what she was giving him without trying to shape it. "You're going to be a biological father to a child you will not raise," Zuri said. "I know that is a specific kind of pain. I'm not dismissing that. But I need you to understand that Min-jae knows, and Min-jae is choosing this anyway, and that is a decision I am choosing to receive and honor, because he is the man who was present when it mattered, and the child will be loved, completely, by both of us." She stopped. Her hands were folded in her lap, and he could see the engagement ring clearly in the flat winter light, and it occurred to him that she had worn it to both of these conversations, not as a statement, not as a weapon, just as the simple fact of what her life was. "What I need from you," she said, "is one thing. I need you to let this child grow up without your shadow over it. I need you to not come looking for them. I need you to not send things through channels, not contact Min-jae's organization with the information you have, not use the biology of this to create any kind of claim or leverage or connection that I haven't invited." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to decide, right now in this room, that this child belongs to the family that is raising it." "Yes," he said. She had expected perhaps more resistance. The speed of the answer made her blink once. "Yes," he said again. "I won't come looking. I won't contact Min-jae with it. I won't make a claim. The child is yours and Min-jae's, and I will not interfere with that in any direction." Zuri held his gaze. She was looking for the negotiation inside the answer, the asterisk, the qualification, the place where the yes became conditional. She was good at looking for those things. She had spent years learning to read the gap between what he said and what he meant. She did not find one. "Okay," she said. "I want to say something," he said. "If that's—" "Go ahead." He took one breath. "When you came to my office, when you were 30 feet away, and you were trying to tell me something that would have changed everything, I have thought about that every day for the past week. And the thing I keep arriving at is that even if Soo-jin hadn't interfered, I am not certain the man I was then would have been the father this child deserves." He paused. "I am not making that into a comfort. I am telling you because it's true. And because I think honesty is the only currency I have left that's worth anything. The version of me that walked in at 11 at night with another woman and told you the marriage was a mistake, that man would not have been adequate to what a child requires." He looked at her. "You made the right call. Not the easy call. The right one." Zuri was quiet. Something in her face, for the first time in both of these conversations, had moved beyond composed, not broken, not collapsed, just slightly opened, the way a window opens when the pressure on both sides of the glass finally equalizes. "I lost the first baby alone," she said. Her voice was different now, lower. The formal structure of the prepared things she had wanted to say had given way to something more unguarded. "The first night when I was in that hospital room, I was so angry at you. Not sad, just furious, because I had tried everything I knew how to try, and you had been 30 feet away, and I had still ended up alone in a hospital bed losing our child." She stopped. And then the anger used itself up. And what was left underneath it was just grief. For the baby, for the marriage, for the person you had been before all of it. She looked at the window for a moment. I grieved you too, Ji-hoon. I want you to know that. I didn't just walk away relieved. I grieved you like you had died because, in a way, the person I married had. He held that. The person I'm building my life with now, she said. He found me in the middle of that grief. He didn't try to fix it or rush it or compete with it. He just stayed close until it became something I could carry rather than something that was carrying me. She looked back at him. That's the difference. You needed me to already be whole. He found me broken and didn't ask me to become something else first. Ji-hoon looked at his hands in his lap. You deserved that from the beginning, he said. Someone who found you as you were. Yes, she said, quietly. I did. The light in the window had shifted, clouds moving over the sun, the pale winter light going briefly gray. Somewhere outside, a car passed. Is there anything you need from me? He said. Practically. I'm not offering involvement. I'm asking if there's anything, medical history, anything the child might need that only I can provide. I want you to have it on record, confidentially, however you want to handle it. She looked at him with an expression that he thought, tentatively, might be the closest thing to warmth she had shown him across both of these visits. I'll have my doctor contact yours, she said. Through my lawyer. Keep it clean. Yes, he said. That's the right way to do it. A pause. Ji-hoon, she said. Yes. Don't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for this. She said it the way she said most things. Not gently, but directly, with the precision of a woman who understood the difference between compassion and sentiment. I know the self-punishment is coming. I know you well enough to know that you will find a way to make this into something you carry for years. And I need you to know that I am not asking you to do that. I am not asking for your suffering as payment. He looked at her. I forgave you, she said. I mean that. Not because you deserve it yet, maybe eventually, but because I needed to be free, and you can't be free while you're still holding someone's debt. She paused. Let yourself be free too, eventually, when you've done the work. The room was very still. He stood. She stood. They were across the living room from each other, 8 feet of ordinary carpet and a coffee table between them, and he looked at her one final time. This woman he had met in a hospital at midnight, who had unloaded his weapon and saved his life, and then, without meaning to, shown him what it was possible to feel, and whom he had proceeded to systematically fail in every way available to him. And he let himself look fully without the management of composure, just the fact of her and the fact of what had been and what was now, and the irreversibility of the distance between those two things. Take care of yourself, he said. You too, she said. He went to the door, he opened it. The morning air was cold and the marigolds were orange and the street was ordinary, and the world outside the door was the same world it had been when he arrived, indifferent and ongoing, making no accommodation for the weight of what had just been finished inside. He walked to the car. Dae-hyun was there. They drove. Soo-jin's legal proceedings moved forward over the following months with the grinding, impersonal efficiency of institutional consequence. The federal investigator's voluntary disclosure was formally reviewed and found to have procedural irregularities. Commissioner Park had been thorough, which delayed and ultimately compromised the case he had tried to build from the intelligence Soo-jin provided. The investigator was quietly reassigned. His career did not survive the reassignment. Soo-jin faced civil litigation from 3 separate parties, including Ji-hoon's organization. She also faced criminal exposure for the intelligence brokering, which her expensive counsel managed to reduce through cooperation agreements that required her to provide documentation of every transaction she had conducted over the 18 months of her network's operation. The documentation was extensive. It implicated people on both sides of the law in ways that made her, for a period of several months, extremely valuable to a number of investigators and extremely unsafe to a number of people who preferred not to be documented. She relocated eventually. Ji-hoon didn't track where. It wasn't information he needed. The organization rebuilt. It took 11 months rather than the year he had estimated, which Dae-hyun attributed to the 3 dock supervisors Ji-hoon had personally cleared. They had returned to work with a loyalty that was qualitatively different from the ordinary professional loyalty of people who were simply well compensated. They had been protected when protection was costly, and they remembered it, and in the specific world Ji-hoon operated in, that kind of memory was the most durable infrastructure you could build. The Busan contract was lost permanently. The Incheon routing was rebuilt from scratch with new architecture that Dae-hyun designed without any input from outside the core team. Jae-hoon sold 2 ancillary operations that had been compromised beyond practical repair and reinvested the capital in 3 new legitimate Port Authority contracts that Commissioner Park's goodwill had made available. The empire was smaller than it had been. It was cleaner than it had ever been. Ji-hoon was not certain whether smaller and cleaner was a victory or simply what remained after the reckoning, and he had decided that the distinction probably didn't matter enough to spend time on. Zuri married Min-jae on a Saturday in late March. Ji-hoon knew the date because Loretta mentioned it once, briefly, in the one conversation they had after everything had concluded. She mentioned it the way you mention weather, as information, not as invitation or wound. He did not attend. He had not been invited. He had not expected to be. He spent that Saturday at the office working through a contract review that could have waited until Monday but didn't need to. Dae-hyun came in around noon with 2 containers of takeout from a Korean place on Clement Street that they both liked, set one on Ji-hoon's desk without comment, and sat in the chair across from him and ate in companionable silence. At some point in the early afternoon, Ji-hoon set down his pen and looked at the wall opposite his desk. "She married him today," he said. Not to Dae-hyun specifically, just said it. "I know," Dae-hyun said. "She'll be good," Ji-hoon said. "She was always going to be good. That was never the question." "No," Dae-hyun said. "It wasn't." A few minutes passed. "You're different," Dae-hyun said. He said it carefully, the way he said things that were observations rather than operational reports. "Since all of it, you're different." "Smaller," Ji-hoon said. "No," Dae-hyun said. "Not smaller, just—" He seemed to search for it, more honest about the size. "Before, you had a version of yourself that you kept in here." He gestured vaguely at the office, the building, the whole machinery of Ji-hoon's professional existence. "And a version that you let Zuri see, and you thought those were the same version. They weren't. Now there's just one." Ji-hoon looked at him. "That's either the most insightful thing you've ever said to me," Ji-hoon said, "or you've been spending too much time with your wife's therapist." "Both," Dae-hyun said, and went back to his food. The baby came in April. Ji-hoon did not know the specific date. He knew it was April because Loretta sent him a text. One line, no details, just, "She's here. Everyone is well." He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. "She's here. A daughter." He put the phone down on his kitchen counter and stood in his kitchen. The enormous kitchen, with the island and the appliances and the design that had been intended to express something about success and had instead become simply the room where he made coffee alone each morning. And he looked at the kitchen and the morning light coming through the window over the sink and the quiet that filled every room of the house from floor to ceiling. He thought about a white room in a Carmel hospital. He thought about small hands. He thought about a child who would grow up called by another man's name in a house full of warmth, who would not know the particular quality of his kitchen's silence, who would never have occasion to. He thought about whether this was the right outcome, and arrived at the same answer he had been arriving at for months, which was that right outcomes and clean outcomes were not always the same thing, and that the one available to him had been the best of the ones that existed, and that the best of the available outcomes was not nothing. It was not nothing. He poured his coffee. He drank it at the window. The bay was visible from where he stood, flat and gray-green in the early light, the bridge emerging from the morning fog in sections, cable by cable, its familiar geometry reasserting itself as the fog thinned. He had stood at this window many mornings. He would stand at it many more. The difference was that now he stood at it knowing exactly what he had lost and exactly how he had lost it, without the comfortable fictions that had once allowed him to believe the loss was inevitable or mutual, or the natural conclusion of 2 people who wanted different things. He had wanted the right things. He had simply chosen, repeatedly, to attend to different things instead, and the gap between wanting and choosing was where his marriage had died. That clarity was not comfort, but it was something he intended to carry forward rather than set down, because setting it down was the way men like him made the same mistakes twice. Several months later, Jae-hoon found the photograph. He was cleaning out his desk. Not the desk at the office, but the one in the study at home. The desk where he had confronted Soo-jin and sat on the floor in the dark and called Dae-hyun and begun the long dismantling of everything he had let be built inside his house. He had not touched the desk's lower drawers in over a year. He opened them now to clean them out and found, in the back of the bottom drawer under a folder of old contracts, a photograph he did not remember putting there. It was a photograph from the early years of the marriage. Zuri was wearing hospital scrubs. Her hair was pulled back and slightly escaping on one side, the way it always escaped toward the end of a shift, and she was laughing at something that had happened just before the photo was taken. Not posed laughing, not the smile she wore at events, but actual laughter, unaware and unguarded. Beside her, Ji-hoon was younger and looked like a man who could not believe his luck. He did not remember who had taken it. He held it and looked at it for a long time. This was before the expansion. Before Soo-jin. Before the long erosion of the thing that had made coming home feel like arriving somewhere. He looked at the man in the photograph, the one who looked genuinely surprised to be that happy, as if happiness were a country he had stumbled into without a map and was not certain he had the right papers for and he felt a complicated thing that was not quite grief and not quite regret and not quite longing but contained elements of all three, the specific feeling of looking at a version of yourself that preceded the damage. He set the photograph on the desk. He did not throw it away. He did not frame it. He left it on the corner of the desk where he could see it when he sat down to work, not as a punishment, not as a shrine to what was gone, but as a document. Evidence of the man who had existed before the choices. A reminder that the potential had been real, that it had not been a fiction he had constructed in retrospect, that there had been a time when the gap between wanting and choosing had been narrow enough that a woman laughing in hospital scrubs had believed it was worth closing. The house was quiet. The evening light was going. Across the bay, in a house he would never visit, a child was beginning to understand the shape of the world, the warmth of it, the safety of it, the particular quality of a home where both people present had chosen to be there. A mother who had rebuilt herself from the hospital floor up. A father who had driven 3 hours to a parking lot and come back because coming back was what love required. Ji-hoon had built an empire on the Pacific coast. He had recovered it after it was damaged. He had destroyed the person who betrayed him. He remained one of the most powerful men in his city, feared and respected in the way of men who have survived everything thrown at them and come out the other side still standing. But the standing was different now. He stood in his house each evening, and the house was quiet, and he did not fill the quiet with meetings or phone calls or the forward momentum that had once made the emptiness invisible. He let it be quiet. He let himself be in the quiet and know exactly what the quiet was. It was the sound of a man who had loved someone completely and chosen everything else and come back to find the love was gone, and the everything else was just things. He was not finished. He was not broken. He was simply clearer about the size of himself and the weight of his choices and the permanent arithmetic of what was given and what was spent and what could not be recovered. And on a particular Tuesday evening, with the photograph on the corner of his desk and the bay going dark outside his window, and the city continuing its ongoing indifferent life around the edges of his quiet house, he sat down in the chair where he had confronted Soo-jin, where he had sat on the floor alone in the dark, where he had made phone calls that changed things, and he did not open his laptop and he did not call anyone, and he did not do anything at all for a very long time. He just sat with himself, in the house he had built, in the city that had made him, with the full knowledge of what he had cost and what it had cost him, and the hard, clear, irreversible understanding that power was not the same thing as wealth, and wealth was not the same thing as safety, and safety was not the same thing as the particular feeling of being known by someone who chose to stay anyway. He had known that feeling once. He had not known what it was while he was holding it. That was the thing about certain kinds of loss. You only learned the name of what you had when you were sitting alone in the place where it used to be, listening to how completely the silence could fill a room that was once full of something else. He sat with that. He let it be true. Outside, the bay held its darkness, and the bridge went on being the bridge, and the city went on being the city, and none of it paused for the quiet education of one man learning, too late and at great cost, the precise and irreversible value of what he once held in his hands.